As followers of Jesus, and as people who are trying to be even better disciples of Jesus, we need to examine our consciences regularly. We look at the commandments and see how we're doing, how we're cooperating with God's grace. We see where we have sinned. We also look to see where we've grown in virtue by cooperating with God's grace. We should examine our consciences every evening at the end of a day. We also examine our consciences as we prepare to celebrate the sacrament of penance before we go to confession. So often when we examine our consciences, we look at what is external to us, how we have acted, how we have behaved, what we have said. But that's only part of the picture. The other part is what's going on inside of me. What are my thoughts, my desires, my attitudes? And so often what is going on inside will strongly influence what goes on outside of ourselves. Sometimes the battle is even stronger within than it is without. It's like looking at the ocean and only seeing the surface of the sea, the ripples and the waves, but not being aware of the powerfully strong currents that are below. Those currents can be very strong within us, and they're going to influence what is outside of us. Let me give you an example. A man considered himself to be a very, very good driver. He had never had a ticket in his whole life, so he was clean with the law. He had never been involved in an accident, so his insurance company recognized him as a bonus driver. But was this man a good driver? The answer is no. He was a terrible driver because his attitude was all wrong. When this man got behind the wheel, he felt like he owned the road. He offered to no one any roadway courtesy. He never yielded the right of way to anybody else. Many times he failed to use his directional signals. And oftentimes on the highway, he was a left lane driver, preventing other people from passing by his hogging of the passing lane. He would get impatient with other drivers and yell at them and swear at them inside his car and even make gestures at them. He never thought twice about drinking and driving. He considered himself to be a very, very good driver, but he wasn't. He never had a ticket. He never had an accident. But he was a lousy driver. Jesus is teaching us in the gospel today about what it means to be a good and faithful disciple of his, a loyal follower of his, that it involves not only what we do externally, but it also involves what's going on internally. He's teaching us that you don't necessarily have to commit murder or commit adultery or commit perjury, lying under oath, to break those commandments. We can do them inside as well, by our intentions, by our attitudes, by our thoughts. He quotes the 5th commandment, you shall not kill. Jesus quotes the 6th commandment, you shall not commit adultery. He quotes the 8th commandment, You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Sin, as well as the corresponding virtue, are really both realms of the mind and the heart. We don't always want to look there. We'd rather concentrate on what's outside. And maybe we think we're looking good to other people. But how are we inside? Do they correspond? Are we the same person externally as we are internally? We need to look at our attitudes inside, the attitudes of our minds and our hearts, and how they influence us, and whether with God's grace we're working on them. My resentments, my jealousies, my lust, my anger, my suspicions of other people, my hatred or my dislike of other people. Very often, what's going on inside is more revelatory of the kind of person that we really are than simply looking at the outside alone. Jesus says in today's gospel from the Sermon on the Mount, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. We can break the commandments by deeds. We can also break those same commandments by thoughts, desires, attitudes. Pornography is a big business in our world. It's against that sixth commandment. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Someone defined pornography as an affair of the mind inside. It is a big business. Lots and lots of people subscribe to it. Why do people indulge in pornography? Oftentimes it's because what's going on in their minds and their hearts is not held in check. Rather, those desires are given free rein. Like, I'm exempt from that commandment. It doesn't apply to me. Nobody's getting hurt, so what difference does it make? But Jesus is teaching us today we can sin not only by our deeds, we can also sin by our thoughts. We need to ask God's grace to hold in check what goes on inside, to not give it free rein, to not give it absolute license. We're bound by God's commandments, and He gives us the grace, if we will accept it, to hold those things in check. We examine our consciences. Please don't fall into that rather glib temptation to say, I don't really do anything wrong. I haven't really committed any sins. Oh, we have, if we look very carefully, not only externally, but also internally. And here is God's mercy, here is God's grace, that we become even better disciples, even better followers of Jesus. And so that was the reminder in the penitential rite with which we began this Mass. That prayer called the Confiteor, I confess. Listen to its opening lines once again. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have sinned through my own fault in my thoughts, in my words, in what I have done, and in what I have failed to do. We make that admission. We count upon the Lord's mercy. We count upon the Lord's grace. And this is what Jesus is teaching us. In today's gospel, part of the Sermon on the Mount, it's also what he taught us 2 weeks ago as this gospel story began with the Beatitudes. And we centered on one of those Beatitudes. And I ask you again today to take that Beatitude, to take those words of Jesus with you and live by them. For he says, "Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God."